The gunshot echoed across Main Street, freezing every soul in Madisonville, Texas for one terrible moment before chaos erupted. Bethany Keller's body jerked backward, her cornflower blue dress blossoming with crimson as she collapsed onto the dusty boardwalk outside Haverson's general store. Her basket of fresh eggs shattered against the wooden planks, yellow yolks mixing with spreading red beneath her crumpled form. Thomas Ryder saw her fall from 200 yards away. He had been tying his stallion, Maverick, to the hitching post outside the saloon when the bank robbery exploded into violence. 3 masked men had burst from the Madisonville Bank and Trust, guns blazing, as Sheriff Miller and his deputies returned fire from behind overturned water troughs and wagon wheels. "Bethany," Thomas bellowed, his voice lost in the cacophony of gunfire and screams. Without hesitation, Thomas vaulted into Maverick's saddle, his spurs digging into the horse's flanks. The powerful animal responded instantly, surging forward as bullets whizzed past rider and mount alike. Thomas bent low over Maverick's neck, his heart hammering against his ribs, his focus narrowed to the motionless figure on the boardwalk ahead. It was the summer of 1883, and Thomas Ryder had been back in Madisonville for exactly 17 days after 8 years, riding with various cattle outfits across the untamed stretches of Texas, Colorado, and Montana. At 32, he had returned home with enough savings to purchase a modest ranch property outside of town. He'd encountered the lovely Bethany Keller, daughter of the town's only doctor, just 3 times since his return, but those brief meetings had been enough to rekindle a flame that had never truly died. "Hold on, Beth," he shouted as Maverick thundered between 2 buildings, providing momentary shelter from the gunfight raging in the street. A bullet splintered wood inches from Thomas's head as he emerged on the other side, but he didn't slow. Bethany lay directly in the crossfire between the bank robbers and the law, and every second counted. People pressed themselves against storefronts or ducked into doorways as Thomas galloped through the battlefield that had moments ago been a peaceful thoroughfare. He could see Sheriff Miller yelling something at him, but the words were lost in the din. A bullet punched through Thomas's hat, another grazed Maverick's flank, causing the horse to whinny in pain but continue forward. Thomas reached Bethany's side and dismounted in one fluid motion, practically throwing himself from the saddle. He fell to his knees beside her, his calloused hands hovering over her still form, afraid to touch her, afraid of what he might find. "Beth," he whispered, gently turning her face toward his. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their sapphire depths. "Thomas," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "What happened? You're hurt, darlin'. I'm getting you out of here." Thomas scanned her body quickly, locating the wound in her left shoulder. It was bleeding steadily but didn't appear to have struck anything vital. Still, she needed her father's care immediately. Another volley of gunfire erupted behind them, bullets striking the wooden posts and splintering glass in the store windows. With utmost gentleness, Thomas slid his arms beneath Bethany's slender form and lifted her against his chest. She cried out in pain, the movement jarring her injury. "I'm sorry, Beth. Hold on to me." Thomas rushed back to Maverick, who stood ground-tied and trembling. With a strength born of desperation, he managed to mount while cradling Bethany in his arms. He settled her across his lap, one arm securely around her waist, the other gripping the reins. "Stop that man!" one of the bank robbers shouted, turning his gun toward Thomas and Bethany. Thomas kicked Maverick into motion just as bullets tore into the boardwalk where they had been moments before. Maverick surged forward, powerful legs eating up the ground as they raced toward Dr. Keller's house and office at the end of town. Thomas kept his body curved protectively over Bethany's smaller form, feeling the warmth of her blood seeping through his shirt. "Stay with me, Beth," he urged as her eyelids drooped. "Your pa's gonna fix you up, but you need to stay awake." "Always liked your voice," she whispered, the ghost of a smile touching her pale lips. "Even when we were children." Thomas's throat tightened at her words, memories rushing back of two young people who had once shared innocent dreams beneath a Texas sky. She had been 16 when he left town, too young for him to court properly, and his restless spirit had needed to see more of the world. He had promised to write, and he had for the first year. But distance and time had a way of changing plans, and eventually the letters had stopped. Yet here she was in his arms, a woman grown, more beautiful than his memories had preserved, and fighting for her life because of a bullet meant for no one in particular. "Doc," Thomas shouted as they approached the white clapboard house with its neat picket fence. "Doc Keller." The door flew open before Thomas could dismount. Dr. James Keller rushed down the steps, his face draining of color as he recognized his daughter in Thomas's arms. "Bethany, dear God, what's happened?" The doctor's hands were already reaching for his child. "Bank robbery." "She was caught in the crossfire," Thomas explained, carefully transferring Bethany into her father's arms. "Bullets in her left shoulder. Bring her inside, quickly," Dr. Keller commanded, already moving toward the house. "Margaret," he called to his wife, "prepare the surgery table." Thomas followed them into the doctor's office, his heart pounding. The neat, orderly space with its medicine cabinets and examination table had been the site of his own treatment numerous times as a boy, broken arms from falling out of trees, stitches from knife-throwing mishaps, even a bullet removal once when he was 16, and foolishly got in the way of a drunken cowhand's poor aim. Margaret Keller's gasp cut through his thoughts as she rushed in from the adjoining house. "Bethany, my baby." The woman composed herself quickly. However, years as a doctor's wife had taught her to act first and feel later when emergencies arose. She immediately began gathering bandages and instruments as her husband carefully laid their daughter on the table. "Thomas, I need to ask you to leave," Dr. Keller said firmly as he cut away the fabric around Bethany's wound. "I ain't going nowhere, Doc," Thomas replied, his voice low but determined. "I'll stay out of your way, but I'm staying." Their eyes met briefly, the concerned father and the stubborn cowboy, before Dr. Keller nodded once, recognizing the particular brand of determination in Thomas's gaze. "Very well. Margaret, the chloroform." Thomas backed against the wall, his hat clutched in his hands as the Kellers worked to save their daughter's life. He watched as they administered the anesthetic, as the doctor's skilled hands probed for the bullet, as Margaret sponged away blood with a steady hand despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. Through it all, Thomas stood motionless, his eyes never leaving Bethany's face. Her dark hair spread across the white cloth beneath her head, her skin ashen against the crimson of her blood. He silently made promises to God, to Bethany, to himself, promises about second chances and making things right, about protection and devotion. After what seemed an eternity, Dr. Keller straightened, holding a misshapen piece of lead between his forceps. "Got it," he declared, dropping the bullet into a metal dish with a dull clink. "The wound is clean, missed the major vessels. She's lost blood, but she'll recover with proper care." Relief washed over Thomas in a wave so powerful his knees nearly buckled. "Thank God," he whispered, the words a prayer more than an exclamation. "She'll need to be watched closely for infection." Dr. Keller continued as he began stitching the wound closed. "And she'll be in considerable pain when she wakes." "I'll help," Thomas offered immediately. "Whatever you need, Doc." Dr. Keller paused in his work, studying Thomas thoughtfully. I seem to recall you riding out of Madisonville some years back, Thomas Ryder. Didn't look to me like you planned on coming back. Thomas met the older man's gaze unflinchingly. I was young and foolish, Doc. Thought I needed to see what was beyond the horizon. He glanced at Bethany's still form. Took me 8 years to realize everything I really wanted was right here all along. Margaret Keller looked up sharply at this, her eyes widening slightly before she returned to bandaging her daughter's shoulder. Dr. Keller merely nodded, resuming his careful stitching. "There's a pot of coffee in the kitchen," Margaret said without looking up. "You look like you could use some, Thomas, and perhaps you might tell us exactly what happened while we finish here." Thomas recognized the invitation for what it was, an acceptance of his presence, at least for now. He retreated to the kitchen and poured 3 cups of strong black coffee, his hands steadier than he would have expected given the circumstances. When he returned, the Kellers were finishing the bandaging. Between sips of coffee, Thomas recounted the events in town: the bank robbery, the gunfight, seeing Bethany fall, and his desperate ride through the crossfire to reach her. He omitted the part about the bullet that had grazed his own arm, the sleeve of his shirt now stiff with dried blood. That was inconsequential compared to Bethany's injury. "The town owes you a debt for your bravery, Thomas," Dr. Keller said when he had finished his tale. "And we cannot thank you enough for bringing our daughter home." Before Thomas could respond, a commotion at the front door drew their attention. Sheriff Miller entered, his weathered face grim beneath his mustache. "Doc," the sheriff acknowledged with a nod. "Mrs. Keller, Ryder." His eyes moved to Bethany. "How is she?" "She'll recover, God willing, Doctor." Keller replied, "What news from town, Sheriff?" "We got 2 of the bandits, 1 dead, 1 wounded and in custody." Sheriff Miller removed his hat. "Third one got away with about half the bank's money. We'll track him down." The sheriff's gaze settled on Thomas. "That was either the bravest or the most fool-headed thing I've seen in 20 years wearing this badge, Ryder. Riding right through a gunfight like that." Thomas shrugged. "Didn't think about it much, Sheriff. Just saw Beth go down and knew I had to get to her." Sheriff Miller nodded slowly. "Well, it's a lucky thing you did. Doc Preston's out of town, so if you hadn't brought her straight to her father." He let the implication hang in the air. A soft moan from the table interrupted their conversation. All eyes turned to Bethany, whose eyelids were fluttering open, confusion evident in her gaze. "Papa," she whispered, trying to focus on the faces around her. "I'm here, sweetheart," Dr. Keller said, moving to her side and taking her hand. "You're safe at home. You've been hurt, but you're going to be just fine." "Thomas," her head turned slightly, searching the room until her eyes found him. "I remember, you came for me." Thomas stepped forward, his throat tight. "Couldn't very well leave the prettiest girl in Madisonville lying in the street, now could I?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips before pain crossed her features. "Hurts," she murmured. "I'll give you something for that, dear," Dr. Keller said, already moving to his medicine cabinet. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "I'll need a statement from Miss Keller when she's up to it, but it can wait. I should get back to town. There's quite a mess to clean up." He replaced his hat and nodded to everyone in turn. "Ryder, you might want to come by the office tomorrow. Banker Simmons was talking about a reward for anyone who helped during the robbery." "Don't need a reward for doing what anyone would do," Thomas replied, his eyes still on Bethany. The sheriff chuckled as he headed for the door. "Not anyone would ride through flying bullets, son. Not for any amount of money." At the threshold, he paused. "Your horse is tied up outside, by the way. Figured you'd need him eventually." After the sheriff departed, Dr. Keller administered a dose of laudanum to ease Bethany's pain. "This will make you sleepy, daughter, but it will help with the discomfort." "Don't want to sleep yet," Bethany protested weakly, her eyes seeking Thomas again. You'll leave. Thomas moved closer, taking her right hand gently in his. I ain't going anywhere, Beth, not unless your pa throws me out. Dr. Keller and his wife exchanged glances. Thomas can stay until you fall asleep, Bethany, her father said. Then he should probably go home and clean up. He can come back tomorrow if he wishes. I'll be back, Thomas promised, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. First thing in the morning. Bethany's eyes were already growing heavy from the medication, but she managed to smile. You said that 8 years ago, too, she murmured, the words slightly slurred. Thomas felt the jab like a physical blow, but he recognized the truth in it. I know, Beth. I broke that promise and I've regretted it ever since, but I'm a different man now, and this time I mean to keep my word. Bethany's eyes drifted closed, but her fingers tightened briefly around his. I hope so, she whispered. I always hoped you'd come back. As the laudanum pulled her into sleep, Thomas stood motionless beside her, still holding her hand, acutely aware of the Kellers watching him. Finally, he gently placed Bethany's hand on the table and turned to face her parents. I know I don't have any right to ask, he began, his voice rough with emotion, but I'd like to call on Bethany properly once she's recovered, if you and Mrs. Keller would permit it. Margaret Keller's expression softened. You saved our daughter's life today, Thomas. I think that earns you the right to ask. Dr. Keller was more measured in his response. Bethany's heart was broken when you left, Thomas. She waited for your letters long after they stopped coming. I won't see her hurt that way again. Neither will I, Doc, Thomas replied firmly. I was young and stupid when I left. Thought I needed to make my fortune before I could offer her anything. Took me too long to realize what really matters. He met the doctor's gaze steadily. I bought the old Crawford place 3 weeks ago. I'm here to stay. Dr. Keller raised an eyebrow. Crawford's? That's a good piece of land, but the house is barely standing. Been working on it since I got back, Thomas explained. Got the roof fixed and the north wall rebuilt. It'll be a proper home by winter. He paused. I came back to Madisonville for a reason, Doc. I never stopped thinking about your daughter. After a long moment, Dr. Keller nodded. We'll see how Bethany feels about it when she's recovered. That will be my answer, Thomas. If she wants to see you, you'll be welcome in this house. It was more than Thomas had dared hope for. Thank you, sir. That's fair. He looked back at Bethany's sleeping form. May I call tomorrow to check on her condition? Of course, Margaret answered before her husband could. And Thomas, you're bleeding. Thomas glanced down at his arm where the bullet graze had soaked his shirt sleeve with blood. It's nothing, madam. Just a scratch. Dr. Keller sighed. Sit down, Thomas. I'll tend to it before you go. As the doctor cleaned and bandaged his arm, Thomas's eyes remained on Bethany's peaceful face. 8 years ago, he had ridden away from Madisonville with dreams of adventure and fortune. Now, all he wanted was a chance to prove to the woman on the table that he would never leave her again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the violence of the previous day. Thomas rode into town early, having slept poorly despite his exhaustion. He'd spent half the night staring at the ceiling of his partially renovated farmhouse, replaying the image of Bethany falling in the street, wondering what might have happened if he hadn't been in town at that precise moment. Before heading to the Keller residence, Thomas stopped at Haverson's general store. The broken glass in the windows had already been replaced, though bullet holes still pockmarked the wooden facade. Inside, he selected the finest writing paper and envelopes the store offered, along with a book of poetry he thought Bethany might enjoy during her recovery. Heard what you did yesterday, Ryder, Mr. Haverson commented as he wrapped the purchases. Riding through all that gunfire to reach Miss Keller, bravest thing I've seen in many a year. Anyone would have done the same, Thomas replied, uncomfortable with the praise. No, sir, they wouldn't have, Haverson countered. Most folks were diving for cover. You were the only one riding toward the bullets. The shopkeeper handed over the wrapped parcel. No charge for these, Mr. Ryder. I can pay my way, Haverson, Thomas protested. Consider it the store's thank you for saving one of our finest citizens, Haverson insisted. Miss Keller volunteers at the school and helps with the church socials. Town wouldn't be the same without her. Thomas accepted the gift with reluctant gratitude, touched by the gesture. As he left the store, several townspeople called out greetings, some even crossing the street to shake his hand and ask after Bethany. Word had clearly spread rapidly about his actions. By the time Thomas reached the Keller home, he was both embarrassed by the attention and reassured by the community's genuine concern for Bethany. He tethered Maverick to the hitching post and approached the door, his purchases tucked under one arm, his hat in his hands. Margaret Keller answered his knock, her tired eyes warming at the sight of him. "Thomas, good morning. Please come in." "How is she, Mrs. Keller?" Thomas asked as he stepped inside. "She had a restless night, but her fever has remained low. James says that's a good sign." She led him through to the sitting room. "She's awake and has been asking for you." Thomas's heart quickened at her words. "May I see her?" "Of course. She's in her bedroom now. We moved her from the surgery late last night. I'll take you up." Margaret paused, noticing his parcels. "You brought gifts." "Just some small things that might help pass the time during her recovery," Thomas explained. Margaret smiled. "That was thoughtful. Come, I'll show you to her room." As they climbed the stairs, Margaret spoke quietly. "James has gone to check on Mr. Peterson. He took a fall yesterday trying to get away from the gunfire. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, but please don't tire Bethany. She needs her rest." "Yes, madam," Thomas promised. Bethany's bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway, a bright space with floral curtains and a patchwork quilt on the bed. The young woman herself was propped up against several pillows, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale but her eyes clear. "Thomas," she greeted him, a smile spreading across her face. "I was beginning to think I dreamed you yesterday." "Not a dream," he assured her, moving to the chair beside her bed. "Though I'm not sure I believe yesterday happened myself sometimes." He set his packages on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule," she admitted with a small laugh that turned into a wince. "Papa says the bullet didn't hit anything important, but it certainly feels important when I try to move." Thomas's expression grew serious. "You scared me half to death, Beth, when I saw you fall." She reached out with her good arm, her fingers brushing against his. "You saved my life, Thomas. Sheriff Miller came by this morning and told me everything, how you rode right through the gunfight to reach me, how you carried me through more gunfire to bring me home." Her blue eyes shimmered with emotion. "Why would you risk your life that way?" Thomas took her hand gently in his. "Didn't think about the risk, only thought about reaching you." He hesitated, then added softly, "Some things are worth facing bullets for." A faint blush colored Bethany's cheeks. "You've been back in town for weeks. Why haven't you called before now?" "Wasn't sure I'd be welcome," Thomas admitted. "The way I left, the way the letters stopped, I figured I'd burned that bridge for good." "I was very angry with you for a long time," Bethany confirmed, though her hand remained in his. "But I never forgot you, Thomas Ryder. And I never forgot you, Beth Keller." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Thought about you every day I was gone. That's why I came back to Madisonville." "Came back for you, if you'll believe that." Bethany studied his face as if searching for the truth in his features. 8 years is a long time, Thomas. We're different people now." "I know that," he acknowledged. "I'm not asking for things to be like they were. I'm asking for a chance to get to know the woman you've become." He reached for the packages he'd brought. "Brought you something to help pass the time while you're recovering." Bethany accepted the first package, carefully unwrapping it to reveal the book of poetry. "Tennyson," she said with genuine pleasure. "How did you know I enjoy poetry?" "Remembered you reading under the old oak tree by the creek," Thomas replied. "You'd get so lost in those books you wouldn't hear anyone approaching until they were right beside you." Her smile deepened. "I'm touched you remembered such a detail." She unwrapped the second package, revealing the writing paper and envelopes. "And this? Thought you might like to write letters or in your journal, and—" Thomas hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "Thought maybe when you're feeling up to it you might write to me sometimes, even if I'm just across town." Understanding dawned in Bethany's eyes. "So I'll have your letters this time." "Yes," Thomas said simply, "and I promise I'll write back, every time." Bethany was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the embossed pattern on the paper. "Yesterday, when I was lying in the street and saw you riding toward me through all that chaos, it felt like something from a storybook, the kind where the hero always comes back for the girl he left behind." She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her gaze. "Is that what this is, Thomas? Are you really back to stay?" "Bought the Crawford place," he told her. "Been fixing it up since I got back. It needs work, but the land's good. Got plans to raise horses, maybe some cattle too eventually." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not that restless boy anymore, Beth. Found out the hard way that adventure isn't much without someone to share it with." "And you want to share it with me?" The question was asked softly, hope warring with caution in her voice. "If you'll let me," Thomas replied. "Not asking for promises now, just asking for a chance to court you proper once you're healed up, with your parents' blessing." Bethany's smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "I'd like that, Thomas, very much." Before either could say more, footsteps on the stairs announced Dr. Keller's return. The doctor entered the room, his eyes moving quickly between his daughter and Thomas. "I see our hero has returned," he observed, moving to Bethany's side to check her bandages. "How are you feeling this morning, daughter?" "Better now," Bethany replied, her eyes still on Thomas. Dr. Keller noted the exchange with a raised eyebrow but said nothing as he examined Bethany's wound. "The inflammation is minimal. You've always been a quick healer." He adjusted her pillows with gentle hands. "Still, you'll need to remain in bed for at least a week, and that arm will need to stay immobilized for longer." "Papa, Thomas has asked permission to court me when I'm recovered," Bethany said, direct as always. "I've told him I would like that." The doctor straightened, regarding Thomas thoughtfully. "Have you now? And what did you tell my daughter about your intentions, Mr. Ryder?" Thomas met the older man's gaze squarely. "Told her I'm back in Madisonville to stay, sir. That I'd like a chance to court her properly if you and Mrs. Keller approve. And if we don't approve, then I'll wait until I earn your approval," Thomas answered without hesitation. "But I won't be leaving again, sir, not for anything." Dr. Keller's stern expression softened slightly. "We'll discuss the matter when Bethany is fully recovered. For now, you may call to check on her progress, and brief visits such as this are acceptable." He glanced at his pocket watch, brief being the operative word. Thomas recognized the dismissal for what it was. "Of course, Doc." He turned back to Bethany. "I'll come tomorrow if that's all right with you." "I'll look forward to it," she replied, her eyes bright despite her pallor. With reluctance, Thomas took his leave, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. She wanted to see him again. It was more than he had dared hope for when he'd returned to Madisonville. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas settled into a routine. Each morning, he would work on his property, mending fences, continuing repairs on the house, tending to the 3 horses he'd purchased as the start of his breeding stock. In the afternoons, he would clean up, don his best shirt, and ride into town to visit Bethany. Their time together was carefully chaperoned at first, with either Margaret or Dr. Keller always present. But as Bethany grew stronger and Thomas proved his reliability, they were occasionally permitted short periods alone together in the parlor, though Margaret remained within earshot in the kitchen. These visits became the center of Thomas's existence. Each day, he learned more about the woman Bethany had become in his absence, her work teaching the youngest children at the school 3 days a week, her involvement with the church, her love of music and literature. He shared stories of his own experiences during the 8 years away, careful to emphasize that while he had seen remarkable things, he had found no true home until his return. 2.5 weeks after the shooting, Bethany was finally permitted to come downstairs and sit in the garden behind the house. Thomas arrived to find her in a white wicker chair beneath an apple tree, a light shawl around her shoulders despite the summer warmth. "You're looking more like yourself every day," he greeted her, taking the chair Margaret had set nearby. "How's the shoulder feeling?" "Stiff," Bethany admitted, "but Papa says that's normal. I'm to start gentle exercises tomorrow to prevent the muscles from weakening too much." She smiled at him, the color returned to her cheeks, her dark hair neatly pinned up. "I'm going stir-crazy in that house, Thomas. Papa says I can't return to teaching until fall, and I'm not to lift anything heavier than a teacup for at least another month." "Sounds like you need a distraction," Thomas observed, reaching into his pocket. "Maybe this will help." He handed her a small tissue-wrapped package. Bethany's face lit up. "What's this?" "Just a little something I thought you might enjoy." She carefully unwrapped the tissue to reveal a small wooden carving of a horse, detailed and smooth, its lines graceful and lifelike. "Thomas, this is beautiful. Did you make this?" He nodded, pleased by her reaction. "Carved it in the evenings. It's meant to be Maverick, the horse that carried us home that day." Bethany ran her fingers over the carving, marveling at the craftsmanship. "I didn't know you could carve like this. Picked it up on cattle drives. Not much else to do during night watches." Thomas shrugged modestly. "Helps me think." "What were you thinking about while you made this one?" Bethany asked, her eyes meeting his. "You," he answered honestly. "How brave you were that day. How much I want to show you the ranch when you're strong enough." Bethany's expression softened. "I'd like that." "Perhaps next week if Papa allows it." "I'd make sure you were comfortable," Thomas promised. "Got the parlor fixed up proper now, and the porch has a nice rocking chair with a view of the valley." They talked for over an hour, planning the visit to Thomas's ranch, discussing his progress on the house, sharing memories of their childhood in Madisonville. When Margaret called from the back door that Bethany should come inside to rest, both were reluctant to end their time together. "Thomas," Bethany said as he helped her to her feet, "thank you for the carving and for coming every day. It means a great deal to me." "No place I'd rather be, Beth," he replied, his hand lingering on hers. "See you tomorrow." Her smile was answer enough. The following week brought the much-anticipated visit to Thomas's ranch. Dr. Keller finally consented, but with strict conditions. The visit must be brief. Margaret would accompany them, and Bethany must ride in the Keller's buggy rather than on horseback to avoid jostling her healing shoulder. Thomas spent 3 days preparing for the visit, working from dawn until well after dusk to ensure everything was presentable. He repainted the front porch, cleared the walking paths of debris, and even planted a small flower garden beside the steps. The inside of the house, while still modest, was now clean and functional, with a comfortable parlor, a functional kitchen, and 2 bedrooms, one furnished, one still awaiting proper furniture. When the Keller's buggy rolled up the lane, Thomas was waiting on the porch, freshly shaven and wearing his newest shirt. He helped Bethany down carefully, his hands gentle on her waist, acutely aware of her mother's watchful gaze. "Welcome to Ryder Ranch," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "It's not much yet, but it's wonderful, Thomas," Bethany interrupted, her eyes taking in the whitewashed clapboard house with its new roof and solid porch. Beyond it stretched rolling pastures, a sturdy barn, and in the distance, the creek that marked the property's southern boundary. "You've done all this in just a few months. Had some help with the big jobs," he admitted, "but yes, been working on it pretty steady." He offered his arm. "Would you like to see the house first or the horses?" "The horses, please," Bethany said eagerly. "I've been cooped up indoors for so long I'd like to stay outside as much as possible." Thomas led Bethany and her mother to the corral behind the barn, where 3 horses grazed Maverick, a chestnut mare named Penny, and a young black colt with a white star on his forehead. "That's Midnight," Thomas explained, pointing to the colt. "Bought him and Penny from a breeder near Austin. They're Tennessee walkers, good bloodlines, gentle temperaments, hoping to build up a proper breeding program over the next few years." "They're beautiful," Bethany said, leaning on the fence rail. "Especially Maverick. I owe that horse my life." "He's special, all right," Thomas agreed, patting the stallion's neck as the horse approached the fence. "Never seen a horse so steady under gunfire." They spent the better part of an hour touring the property, with Thomas pointing out his plans for expansion, where he intended to build a larger barn, which fields would be planted with hay, where additional corrals would be constructed as the herd grew. Throughout it all, Bethany listened attentively, asking questions and offering suggestions that revealed her own knowledge of ranch operations. "You know quite a bit about ranching for a doctor's daughter," Thomas observed as they finally made their way to the house for refreshments. "I helped the Wilsons with their farm after Mrs. Wilson fell ill 3 years ago," Bethany explained. "Learned more than I ever expected about livestock and crop rotation." "Beth has always been one to pitch in wherever she's needed," Margaret added. "That's why she's so missed at the school. The children adore her." Inside, Thomas had prepared a simple spread of cold meats, bread, cheese, and fresh fruit, along with lemonade he'd made that morning. They ate in the parlor, where Thomas had installed a comfortable sofa and 2 armchairs around a polished oak table. "The house is coming along nicely," Margaret commented, looking around with approval, "though it could use a woman's touch in certain areas." "Mother," Bethany chided, blushing slightly. "It's all right," Thomas said with a smile. "Mrs. Keller's right. Been focusing on making it solid and functional. Haven't given much thought to making it homey yet." "Some curtains would help," Margaret suggested, "and perhaps a few rugs. The floors are lovely but rather bare." "I'll keep that in mind, madam." Thomas's eyes met Bethany's briefly, both of them understanding the implications behind Margaret's suggestions. As they prepared to leave, Bethany lingered on the porch while her mother returned to the buggy to arrange the cushions for the journey home. "Thank you for today, Thomas," she said softly. "I can see how much work you've put into this place. It's going to be a beautiful home." "It's getting there," he agreed, standing close beside her. "Still needs something, though." "What's that?" Bethany asked. Thomas looked down at her, his eyes serious. "You, Beth, this place needs you." Bethany's breath caught, her eyes widening at his directness. "Thomas, I know it's soon," he rushed on. "I know we're still getting reacquainted, but I want you to know my intentions. I came back to Madisonville for you, and everything I've done here, every nail I've hammered and board I've placed, has been with you in mind." He took her hand gently. "Not asking for an answer now, just want you to know where I stand." Bethany squeezed his hand, emotion shining in her eyes. "I think I've known where you stand since you rode through Gunfire to reach me," she whispered. "And I think I might be standing in the same place." It was as much as either of them could say with Margaret waiting in the buggy, but it was enough for now. Thomas helped Bethany down the steps and saw her safely into the buggy, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As summer gave way to early autumn, Bethany's strength returned steadily. By September, she was able to resume light duties at the school, though she still tired more quickly than before. Her visits to Thomas's ranch became regular occurrences, sometimes accompanied by her mother, but increasingly often with just the two of them, her parents' trust in Thomas growing with each passing week. On a golden afternoon in late September, Thomas drove his wagon to the Keller home to collect Bethany for a picnic. They had planned to visit the creek that ran through his property, a spot Bethany had yet to see, as it was too far from the house for her to walk during her earlier visits. Dr. Keller met Thomas at the door. "She's nearly ready," he said, gesturing for Thomas to enter. "I'd like a word with you while we wait, if you don't mind." "Of course, Doc," Thomas replied, following the older man into his study. Dr. Keller closed the door and motioned for Thomas to take a seat. "You've been calling on my daughter for nearly 3 months now, Thomas." "Yes, sir." "In that time, I've watched you rebuild not only your property but your reputation in this town. The way you saved Bethany's life certainly helped, but it's your consistency since then that has impressed me more." The doctor leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas thoughtfully. "You say you intend to stay in Madisonville this time?" "I do, sir." Thomas met the man's gaze directly. "Nothing could take me away again. And your intentions toward Bethany?" "I believe we agreed to revisit that discussion when she recovered." Thomas sat up straighter. "My intentions haven't changed, Doc. I love your daughter, have loved her since before I left, though I was too young and foolish to understand what that meant. I want to marry her if she'll have me, and if you and Mrs. Keller give your blessing." Dr. Keller nodded slowly. "I thought as much. You should know that Margaret and I have discussed the matter at length." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "We've decided that if Bethany wishes to accept you, we will not stand in the way." Thomas's heart leaped, but the doctor wasn't finished. "However," Dr. Keller continued, "I would ask that you wait until Christmas to propose. Give yourselves these additional months to be certain. Bethany has had a traumatic experience, and I want to be sure her feelings are not merely gratitude for your heroism." "I understand, sir," Thomas agreed, though part of him wanted to object. He knew his own mind, and he believed he knew Bethany's heart as well. But he respected Dr. Keller too much to argue. "I'll wait until Christmas." "Good man." Dr. Keller stood and extended his hand. "Now I believe my daughter is waiting for her picnic." Bethany appeared in the hallway as they emerged from the study, lovely in a blue dress that matched her eyes, a light shawl draped over her shoulders against the autumn breeze. Her dark hair was loosely pinned up, a few tendrils framing her face. "Are you two conspiring?" she asked, noting their handshake. "Just man talk," her father replied with a rare wink. "Enjoy your picnic and remember to be home before dark." Thomas helped Bethany into the wagon, placing the picnic basket Mrs. Keller had prepared securely behind the seat. As they drove toward his property, Bethany studied his face. "You seem different today," she observed. "What did my father say to you?" Thomas glanced at her with a smile. "Can a man just be happy to spend an afternoon with a beautiful woman?" "Of course," she replied, "but there's something else. Your eyes are practically dancing, Thomas Ryder." "Maybe I'm just looking forward to showing you my favorite spot on the property," he deflected, though he couldn't quite hide his elation. The knowledge that her parents would approve a Christmas proposal burned like a warm coal in his chest. The creek that bordered Thomas's land was at its most beautiful in autumn, with the cottonwood trees along its banks turning gold and the water running clear and cool over smooth stones. Thomas had prepared a spot for their picnic, clearing a small area and placing a fallen log where they could sit comfortably. "This is lovely," Bethany sighed as they spread the blanket beside the water. "I can see why it's your favorite place." "Used to come here as a boy," Thomas admitted, helping her arrange the food Mrs. Keller had packed. The Crawford place was abandoned even then, but this creek was the best spot for fishing for miles around. "Always dreamed of owning it someday." Bethany smiled at him. "And now you do." "Dreams do come true, it seems." "Some of them," Thomas agreed, his eyes holding hers. "Still working on others." They ate in comfortable companionship, talking easily about Thomas's plans for the ranch, Bethany's students, and the upcoming harvest festival in town. When they had finished, Thomas suggested a short walk along the creek bank. "Are you up to it?" he asked. "Don't want to overtire you." "I'm much stronger now," Bethany assured him, accepting his hand as she rose from the blanket. "Besides, I've been curious about what lies upstream." "You mentioned a waterfall once." "It's more of a cascade than a proper waterfall," Thomas explained as they walked, her hand still in his. "But it's pretty, especially after rain." They strolled slowly along the creek, stopping occasionally to examine interesting rocks or watch the small fish darting in the shallows. Thomas was acutely aware of Bethany beside him, the light scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the way the dappled sunlight through the trees created patterns on her skin. When they reached the small cascade, Bethany exclaimed with delight. The water tumbled over a series of rocky ledges, creating a musical sound that filled the small clearing. Wildflowers still bloomed along the banks despite the advancing season, adding splashes of color to the golden landscape. "It's perfect," Bethany breathed, turning to Thomas with shining eyes. "Like something from a storybook." Thomas couldn't resist any longer. With gentle pressure on her hand, he drew her closer. "Beth," he said softly, "I know we've only been courting a few months, and I promised your father I'd wait to ask what I want to ask, but I need you to know something." "What is it?" she asked, looking up at him with those clear blue eyes that had haunted his dreams for 8 long years. "I love you," he said simply. "Have loved you since we were hardly more than children. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life, and coming back to you was the smartest thing I ever did." Bethany's free hand rose to touch his cheek. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered. "I've loved you too, even when I was angry with you for leaving, even when I told myself I needed to forget you. When I saw you that day on Main Street, before all the shooting started, my heart recognized you before my mind did." Thomas turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. "I'm not asking the question yet, gave your pa my word, but I want you to know that I'm going to when the time is right. And I hope when I do you'll say yes." "I already know my answer, Thomas Ryder," Bethany replied, her voice steady despite the tears shimmering in her eyes. "And yes, it's yes." Thomas's heart felt too full for his chest. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down until his lips met hers in their first kiss, gentle, reverent, a promise of all that was to come. Bethany's arms slid around his neck as she returned the kiss, her body fitting perfectly against his. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Christmas feels like a mighty long time away," he murmured. Bethany laughed, the sound mingling with the cascade behind them. "We've waited 8 years already. What's another 3 months?" As autumn deepened toward winter, Thomas and Bethany settled into a rhythm that became the talk of Madisonville. They were seen together at church on Sundays, at town gatherings, and riding along the countryside when weather permitted. Thomas continued to expand and improve his ranch, while Bethany resumed more of her duties at the school as her strength returned fully. By early December, the first real cold snap had descended on Madisonville, bringing frost to the morning grass and turning breaths to visible puffs in the air. Thomas rode into town one afternoon to find Bethany at the schoolhouse, helping the children decorate for Christmas. Mr. Ryder. Several of the younger students called when he appeared in the doorway, stomping snow from his boots. They had grown accustomed to his visits and often peppered him with questions about his horses. Bethany looked up from where she was helping a small girl hang paper stars from the ceiling, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Thomas, we weren't expecting you today." "Thought I'd surprise you," he replied, removing his hat. "Finished the new stall in the barn earlier than expected." He surveyed the festive chaos of the schoolroom with amusement. "Looks like I arrived just in time to help." For the next hour, Thomas found himself enlisted to hang garlands in the high corners of the room, lift children to place ornaments on the small tree by the window, and listen to excited descriptions of Christmas wishes. Through it all, he watched Bethany in her element, patient and kind with even the most rambunctious children, her laughter frequent and genuine. "You're good with them," he commented as they walked back to the Keller house after the decorating was complete, the winter sunset casting long shadows across the snow-dusted street. "I love teaching," Bethany admitted. "Especially the little ones. They see the world in such a different way." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Would you miss it? If you weren't teaching anymore?" Bethany glanced at him curiously. "Are you asking if I'd miss teaching if I married you and moved to the ranch?" "Maybe," he acknowledged with a small smile. "Been thinking about it lately." "I would miss certain aspects," she said thoughtfully, "but I've always believed there are seasons in life. And besides," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "the ranch isn't so far that I couldn't still help at the school sometimes, or perhaps someday teach our own children. Our own children." The words sent a wave of warmth through Thomas despite the December chill. "I'd like that," he said softly. They had reached the Keller house, but before they could climb the steps to the porch, Thomas stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. "Beth, I know Christmas is still a few weeks away and I promised your father I'd wait, but there's something I need to ask you." Bethany's eyes widened. "Thomas, you're not going to—" "No," he assured her quickly. "Not that question, not yet." He took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "The Christmas Eve dance at the town hall, would you save me all your dances?" Relief and something like disappointment flickered across Bethany's face before she smiled. "All of them. Even the Virginia reel that Mr. Haverson always insists on leading." "Especially that one," Thomas said with a grin. "Can't have you swinging around with Seth Williams or any of those other fellows who have been eyeing you since you were 16. Bethany laughed, the sound like music in the cold air. "As if I'd want to dance with anyone but you, Thomas Ryder." She stepped closer, lowering her voice even though they were alone on the street. "Yes, I'll save all my dances for you, this Christmas and every Christmas after." The Christmas Eve dance was a Madisonville tradition dating back decades. The town hall would be transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles, creating a warm haven against the winter night. Every family in the county would attend, bringing dishes to share for the communal supper before the dancing began. Thomas arrived early, having spent extra time making sure both he and Maverick were properly groomed for the occasion. He wore his best suit purchased specifically for this night with a new string tie and polished boots. In his pocket rested a small velvet box containing his grandmother's engagement ring, brought from the bank in Austin where it had been stored since his mother's passing years ago. Dr. Keller had given his blessing the previous evening, when Thomas had formally requested permission to propose to Bethany at the dance. "Christmas Eve is close enough to our agreement," the doctor had said with a rare smile, "and I can see neither of you wishes to wait any longer." The town hall was already filling with families when Thomas entered, the air fragrant with pine and spiced cider. He greeted friends and neighbors, accepted teasing about his uncharacteristically formal appearance, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. And then Bethany arrived with her parents, and Thomas forgot to be nervous. She wore a gown of deep blue velvet, its modest neckline adorned with lace, its full skirt swirling around her as she moved. Her dark hair was elegantly arranged, with small white flowers woven into the curls. But it was her smile when she spotted him across the room that took his breath away, radiant, loving, and meant only for him. Thomas crossed to meet her, barely aware of the knowing glances and whispers that followed his path. "You look beautiful," he said when he reached her side. "And you look very handsome," Bethany replied, her eyes taking in his formal attire with appreciation. "I almost didn't recognize you without dust on your boots." Thomas laughed, offering her his arm. "Only for special occasions, madam." The evening progressed like a dream. They shared supper at a table with the Kellers and several other families, participated in the group's singing of Christmas carols, and exchanged greetings with what seemed like every resident of Madisonville County. Through it all, Thomas was acutely aware of the box in his pocket and the moment that approached, when the musicians finally began tuning their instruments for the dancing. Thomas led Bethany to the floor for the first waltz. He had practiced for weeks, determined not to embarrass her with his rusty dancing skills. "You've been practicing," Bethany observed as he guided her confidently through the steps. "Might have asked Mrs. Patterson for a refresher lesson or two," Thomas admitted with a grin. "Figured if I was claiming all your dances, I should at least know what I'm doing." Bethany's eyes softened. "You never cease to surprise me, Thomas Ryder." They danced every dance, from the stately waltzes to the lively reels, laughing together when they missed steps and moving in perfect harmony when they didn't. As midnight approached, the band shifted to slower melodies, and Thomas knew his moment had come. During a brief pause between songs, he led Bethany toward the doors that opened onto the town hall's small balcony. "Need some air," he suggested casually. The night outside was crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. A nearly full moon illuminated the snow-covered street below, casting everything in silver light. Thomas had arranged with young Jimmy Patterson to ensure the balcony was clear and adorned with a few extra candles and sheltered lanterns, creating a private, golden glow. "Oh, Thomas," Bethany breathed, taking in the romantic setting, "it's magical out here." Thomas took both her hands in his, turning her to face him. "Beth," he began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. 8 years ago, I left Madisonville thinking adventure and fortune were waiting for me beyond the horizon. What I found instead was that no sunset was beautiful enough, no victory satisfying enough, no place comfortable enough without you there to share it with me." Bethany's eyes glistened in the candlelight as he continued. "When I came back to Madisonville, I was hoping for a second chance, but I never expected that chance would come with you lying wounded in the street." His voice roughened at the memory. "Riding through that gunfire to reach you was the easiest decision I ever made, because a life without you in it isn't a life I want to live." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing the velvet box. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee on the snow-dusted balcony. "Bethany Marie Keller, I have loved you since we were children, though I didn't understand then what love truly meant. I understand now." It means putting your happiness above my own. It means building a life worthy of sharing with you. And it means promising to ride through whatever bullets life fires our way, always coming back to you. He opened the box, revealing the delicate gold ring with its small diamond and 2 flanking sapphires. Will you marry me, Beth? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, and the love of my life until my dying day? Tears spilled onto Bethany's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she found her voice. Yes, Thomas. Yes to all of it. Thomas slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was deep and tender, a promise sealed beneath the winter stars. When they finally parted, Bethany looked down at the ring on her finger. It's beautiful, she whispered. Is this my grandmother's? Thomas confirmed. My mother wore it until she passed, and it's been waiting for the right woman ever since. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. That's you, Beth. It's always been you. I love you, Thomas Ryder, Bethany said, her voice strong and sure. I think part of me has loved you from the first moment you pulled my braids in school when we were 10 years old. Thomas laughed. Not my smoothest courtship move. It worked, Bethany pointed out, her smile radiant. Here we are. Here we were indeed, Thomas thought as he drew her close again. From childhood friends to separated souls to reunited lovers, their path had been neither straight nor easy. But standing on that moonlit balcony with Bethany in his arms and their future stretching before them like an open plain, Thomas knew every step, even the missteps, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The wedding of Thomas Ryder and Bethany Keller took place on a perfect spring day in April 1884, with apple blossoms scenting the air and meadowlarks singing in the fields surrounding Madisonville. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the white-steepled church where both bride and groom had attended services since childhood. Bethany wore her mother's wedding gown, altered and adorned with new lace to fit her slender frame. Her dark hair was crowned with a wreath of wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of early roses from Mrs. Patterson's garden. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Thomas thought he had never seen anything so beautiful in all his travels. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such conviction that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He gathered Bethany into his arms and sealed their union with a kiss that prompted both cheers and a few scandalized gasps from the older church members. The celebration that followed at the Ryder Ranch was joyous and lengthy. Thomas had completed extensive renovations to the house, adding a larger kitchen, a proper dining room, and a wide covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the structure. Tables were set up in the yard beneath flowering trees, and lanterns were strung for when darkness fell. As husband and wife greeted their guests and accepted congratulations, Sheriff Miller approached with a small package. "Wedding gift," he said gruffly, handing it to Thomas. "Something I've been saving for the right moment." Thomas unwrapped the package to find a flattened, misshapen piece of lead. He looked up at the sheriff in confusion. "That's the bullet Doc Keller took out of Mrs. Ryder's shoulder," Sheriff Miller explained. "Thought you might want it, seeing as it brought you two together in a manner of speaking." Thomas was momentarily speechless, but Bethany reached for the bullet with a small smile. "Thank you, Sheriff. It's a rather unusual keepsake, but a meaningful one." "Had it mounted in a shadow box for your wall," the sheriff added, looking slightly embarrassed by his sentimental gesture. "Figure every marriage has its own story, and yours started with a bang, so to speak." Later, as twilight deepened and the celebration continued around them, Thomas led Bethany away from the crowd to the newly built gazebo overlooking the creek. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Ryder?" Thomas asked softly. "Completely, Mr. Ryder," Bethany replied, turning in his arms to face him, "though it still feels strange to hear my new name." "You'll get used to it," he promised, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "We have a lifetime for you to practice." "A lifetime," Bethany repeated, wonder in her voice. "If you had told me a year ago that I would be standing here as your wife today, I wouldn't have believed it possible." "Life has a way of surprising us," Thomas observed. "Sometimes with stray bullets, sometimes with second chances." Bethany's hand came up to touch the spot on her shoulder where the bullet had struck. The wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar that would fade with time. "I used to think everything happened for a reason," she said thoughtfully. "But I'm not sure I can believe that getting shot was somehow meant to be." "Maybe not the bullet itself," Thomas agreed, "but what came after? Me finding my courage, you finding your forgiveness, both of us finding our way back to each other." He shook his head. "Can't help thinking there was some kind of plan in that, Beth." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. "Perhaps you're right. Either way, I'm grateful not for the bullet, but for the cowboy who rode through gunfire to reach me." "Always will," Thomas promised, drawing her closer. "Whatever comes our way, Beth, I'll always find a way back to you." Their kiss sealed the promise as darkness fell completely and their guests began calling for the bride and groom to return. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lights and music, toward the beginning of their life together. In the years that followed, the Ryder Ranch flourished under Thomas and Bethany's care. The horse breeding program expanded, with Ryder-bred Tennessee walkers becoming known throughout Texas for their smooth gait and gentle temperament. They added cattle as well, and by 1888, the ranch was one of the most prosperous in the county. Their family grew alongside their business. Their first child, a son they named James Thomas after both grandfathers, arrived in the spring of 1885, strong, lunged, and sturdy from his first breath. A daughter, Margaret Rose, joined the family 2 years later, with her mother's blue eyes and her father's determined spirit. Bethany continued her involvement with the Madisonville school, teaching 2 days a week once the children were old enough, while Thomas served on the town council and helped organize the county's first proper fire brigade. They became pillars of the community, known for their generosity during hard times and their readiness to celebrate in good ones. Each Christmas Eve, no matter the weather or circumstances, Thomas and Bethany attended the town dance. And each year, just before midnight, they would slip away to whatever quiet spot they could find, sometimes the balcony where he had proposed, sometimes a corner of the churchyard, once even the shelter of their own wagon during a snowstorm, and Thomas would present Bethany with a small gift to commemorate another year of their love. On their 10th anniversary in 1894, after a particularly bountiful year at the ranch, Thomas surprised Bethany with his most ambitious gift yet: plans for a new schoolhouse in Madisonville, to be built with funds they had donated anonymously. "Thomas," Bethany gasped as she looked over the architectural drawings spread on their dining room table. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help design it," Thomas replied, his arm around her waist. "The town's growing, and those children deserve better than that cramped, drafty building they're in now. Figured the best teacher in the county should have some say in how a proper school ought to be built." Bethany's eyes filled with tears as she turned to embrace him. "Just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, Thomas Ryder, you prove me wrong." The Madisonville School opened its doors in September 1895, A handsome brick building with large windows, modern heating, and a small library dedicated to the memory of Dr. James Keller, who had passed away the previous winter after a brief illness. Bethany accepted the position of head teacher with Thomas's enthusiastic support. "You were meant for this, Beth," he told her on the night before the school's first day. "Those children are lucky to have you." "I can only do it because I have you," she replied, nestled against him in their bed. "You make everything possible, Thomas." Their life wasn't without challenges. The drought of 1896 threatened both crops and livestock, forcing difficult decisions and long hours of labor to preserve what they could. When 10-year-old James fell from a horse and broke his arm badly, the days of waiting to see if he would regain full use of the limb tested their faith and resolve. And the loss of Bethany's mother in 1898 to influenza left a hole in their family that took time to heal. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome, their love deepening with each joy shared. The bullet that had nearly taken Bethany's life became a story told to their children, and eventually their grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most beautiful journeys. In the summer of 1903, 20 years after the shooting that had changed their lives, Thomas and Bethany sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, James running much of the ranch operations at 18, Margaret away at college in Austin, studying to become a teacher like her mother. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas said, noticing Bethany's contemplative expression. She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about that day. The bank robbery, the gunfire, you riding through it all to reach me. Seems like another lifetime sometimes," Thomas admitted, his hand finding hers, "and yet in other ways it feels like yesterday." Bethany turned to look at him, the fading light caressing the silver now threading through his dark hair, the lines that years of sun and laughter had etched around his eyes. "Would you do it again, knowing everything that would come after?" "In a heartbeat," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Though I might duck a little lower in the saddle this time." He chuckled, running a hand over the small scar on his arm where a bullet had grazed him that day, a detail he hadn't shared with Bethany until years after, not wanting to worry her. "I would too," Bethany said softly. "Even the bullet. It brought you back to me, after all." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple, marveling as he often did at how fortunate he was. In a life filled with choices both good and bad, riding through Gunfire to reach Bethany Keller had been his finest moment, not because of bravery, but because of love. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, husband and wife sat in contented silence, surrounded by the life they had built together. From tragedy had come triumph, from danger had come deliverance, and from a stray bullet had come a love story that would be told in Madisonville for generations to come.